The previous episode ended with us assembling the rear part of the Volgatti, and it really started to look like a car. At the very end, many noticed that the spoiler became functional and started moving just like in the original. We'll start with the implementation of this mechanism. First, we use a laser cutter to cut out this kind of construction set from thin 4mm plywood.
It's time to continue our work on the rear retractable spoiler. For this, the linear actuators have finally arrived from China. They took a very long time to get here, but they made it. They will serve as the spoiler supports to which it will be attached and from which it will extend. To mount the actuators to the spoiler, we made this bracket out of plywood for now, just temporarily, while our main parts are being cut on the laser. We also ordered clevises for the linear actuators. We'll remove this original mount here and instead install a hinge joint, which will allow us to securely attach the spoiler itself to the linear actuator. Once everything is finally secured, we'll start testing and adjusting. We specifically ordered 2 actuators of different lengths so that at the end of their extension, the spoiler would change its angle of attack. We've set up a rough setup to show how everything will be installed on the car. Let me show you what I mean.
I think everyone understands how it works. Now there's just one thing left to install the mechanism into the body and do it in a way that keeps it functional. That's exactly what we started working on. First of all, we cut out the recesses. We started by drilling holes and then used an angle grinder to cut out the required shape. 5 minutes and it's done.
So we examined the design of these actuators and came to the conclusion that we're not satisfied with this particular aspect. The rod itself is very thin. It's made of aluminum, and in our opinion, it's quite fragile. That's why we had identical rods made, but out of stainless steel. These are much stronger and the wall is much thicker. I think this strength is more than enough for us now, and since they're made of stainless steel, we decided to polish them as well, which will also give them a more aesthetic look.
So, Kolya took on the polishing. 20 minutes later, we have this beauty. As a result, we replaced the rods with stronger ones, installed hinge joints, and now it really looks like a solid, proper mechanism that just needs to be integrated into the body. First, we put our assemblies into the prepared holes. We carefully insert them and take measurements. Since the body is made of fiberglass, we decided to mount the mechanisms in the same way. First, we come up with a housing on site, adding reinforcements, gussets, and stiffening grips. We start by making this out of cardboard. Once the design takes shape, we transfer the cardboard templates onto fiberglass. We'll cut the main panels from a pre-made sheet of fiberglass and then assemble them together and attach them to the body on site. Something like that. We marked it out, cut it up, and once again head off to Narnia. Now, by any means possible, we need to assemble this construction set before covering it with fiberglass mat. A glue gun really comes in handy here. Piece by piece, we end up with this kind of thing, which we then thoroughly reinforce with fiberglass mat. The next step is to come up with a solid mounting for the actuators to the body. Since fiberglass mat is a very pliable material, we took advantage of that. As a result, we simply covered the body, and after the resin dried, we ended up with a perfectly fitted fiberglass mount, which works and looks like this. In the meantime, we faced a major dilemma. Initially, I planned for the front part of the car to look like this, a beautiful, elegant white color paired with chrome details. That was the design we were working towards, but, as often happens, the plans changed during the process. That's why Andrei took the once chromed headlight bezel, he removed it, gave it a good sanding, degreased it, and applied primer.
You understood everything correctly. We decided not to restore these rusty bezels back to chrome. We decided to make them out of carbon fiber, and not by laminating either. We want to make completely new carbon fiber headlight bezels using vacuum molding technology. To do this, we need to create a master as high quality as possible as the piece from which the mold will be taken. The bezels are left and right and they're symmetrical, so we'll make just one. Here we will leave one as an example of what it was like. There, and this is the one we'll be working with. We cleaned off the rust, sprayed it with an acid primer, dried it thoroughly, and then apply the polyester primer on top, which supposedly works like liquid filler. But still, the bezels are not perfect yet. We need to devote as much time as possible to our template, since this will be our base, and there shouldn't be any flaws here that could end up on the finished product. So now we'll sand it down and start applying filler. We make some scratches so the filler will adhere, and then we'll apply the filler.
Here many of you are probably wondering, why move away from the original design? After all, it really does look great. In fact, we haven't made a final decision yet and wanted to look at the design from a different perspective. In any case, this isn't a classic restoration. We have a mix of eras and technologies. There will be a lot of carbon fiber parts in the rear of the Bugatti. That's when the idea came to us to replace our chrome with forged carbon. For now, it's just an idea that we visualized and got these renders. By that time, Andrei had perfected the shape of the previously uneven trim rings in order to create the future ideal parts. Looking ahead, I can say that such perfectly smooth trim rings have never been installed on a Volga before, because after stamping there were always marks left, which we removed and then wrapped the perfect ring in fiberglass mat using the proper technique. As a result, we got a mold that's ready for making a flawless carbon fiber part, but more on that a bit later. In the meantime, let's get back to the spoiler. In the end, we cut out from stainless steel the exact same structure that we originally assembled from plywood. Now all that's left is to thoroughly sand it and remove the cutting marks. The next step is to integrate these elements directly into the spoiler, which will then be able to rise and change its angle depending on the situation. To do this, we cut through holes in it, put it on the body, and again begin to roll up the holes that we just cut. This is done for precise positioning. At this point, the spoiler is lying exactly where it will be when closed, as are the metal plates. That's why we set them in place right on the spot, and we can be sure that everything will align perfectly later on. As a result, one of the embedded parts is set into the spoiler body, and the other will be attached from the bottom, thus creating an extremely reliable, sturdy sandwich. Of course, this sandwich needs somewhere to hide when it's in the closed position. That's exactly what we started working on. Initially, we just cut through holes, which now need to be finished nicely. As a result, after a few days, we have this little trace. Now, all that's left is to make the holes through which the actuators will enter and exit, but it's not that simple here. As you can see, one of the holes is just a simple round shape, but the second one looks more like an oval. The thing is, one of the actuators needs to change its position so that the spoiler can adjust its angle. That's where things got tricky. Of course, we could have just left an oval hole, but we decided to add a connection with sealing rubber gaskets, oil seals, to protect the mechanism from potential moisture ingress. That was the main difficulty. All the challenges here have been solved, so we can move on to the next ones.
And now let's take a look over there. Something has arrived here. Some kind of round thing, but it's not a watermelon. Is it a receiver or something? I don't know. Let's figure it out now. And this is a vacuum pump. And it's not for an aquarium, but for vacuum infusion. So a receiver, a vacuum pump. What else do we have here? Here we have components, injection resin, a little hardener. All right, this is our sacrificial fabric, a hose for connection, a sealing cord, okay, mesh, and here is the carbon fiber. This is the forged carbon, and it's already cut, but that's not all we have. Carbon fiber in a roll where a lot of different pieces are packed together, so we don't have to send many separate rolls. All of this was wound into a single roll of film. And then comes the carbon fiber, the red weaving over there. And somewhere in there probably is the black one. Our mold is ready for making the carbon fiber headlight bezels. Let's get started. So the first thing we need to do with the matrix is to apply a release layer. At first, we used wax. It works well with fiberglass, but in vacuum infusion conditions, it doesn't work at all. As a result, the part got stuck. I had to pry it out, completely dig it out of the mold, and I scratched the mold. I didn't bother to redo the mold. For our purposes, it's still usable, but we did scratch it a bit. Then an alcohol separator. An alcohol separator in principle works with a vacuum, but there's one important nuance. When you're laying down the fabric, if you later try to very carefully adjust its position, move it around or peel it off, you'll almost certainly end up pulling off the alcohol-based film along with it. And as a result, the part also becomes unusable and gets stuck. In the end, we settled on a two-stage release agent system. First, a pore filler is applied, and then a semi-permanent release agent. It's applied in several stages with intermediate drying in between. You moisten a rag and simply rub the part with these kinds of motions. This layer dries very quickly. After about 5 minutes, you can apply the next one. The release agent is applied in at least 5 layers. The first time, you could probably even do 10, and then after each demolding, you add 1 or 2 more layers. Another important point, the areas where the sealing cord will be glued really need to be carefully protected with masking tape, making sure everything is properly covered. Just like that. And we simply add another new layer of separator. While our separator is drying, we start preparing the carbon fiber. We're going to use forged carbon. There are 2 types of forged carbon. The first is when it's cut into large diamond-shaped pieces like this. And the second is when it's chopped up like straw and then arranged into a pattern. Why are we gonna use this checker here? I just like this pattern more, you know, the diamond one, it's larger and bolder. The straw type is also cool, it's nice too. But for this particular part, I think the diamond pattern is the better choice. So that's what I'm going with. But the straw pattern is also pretty cool. It's nice too, and it comes in different densities. Here it's coarser, here it's finer, and this one is almost wooden. The straw pattern definitely has its place as well. Previously, carbon fiber was just cut with scissors. That method works, but it's actually pretty tedious. Someone told us about the existence of these kinds of knives. How does it work? Just like this, very fast and efficient. The next step is to start laying out the forged carbon. What's so hard about that, you might say? You just take it and lay it out, right? But that won't work. There are going to be a lot of layers here that will shift around, and in the end, all our carbon will just fall down into this recess, right? And nothing good will come of it. That's where glue really comes to our rescue. We'll carefully spray it onto the mold and also on each subsequent layer, so the carbon fiber sticks firmly to it, as well as to all the following layers. In the end, when the resin is drawn in under vacuum, the resin dissolves this glue and it simply disappears. But it's absolutely essential for making such a complex part, ensuring that everything stays exactly where we put it, just as intended. Otherwise, when the vacuum is applied, everything will get pulled together and our entire pattern will just bunch up in that recess. We apply the glue. Ugh, it stinks. And then we just lay out the mosaic.
At first glance, seems the carbon is laid out around the perimeter, so what's left is to soak it with resin and the part is done. But that's not the case. In the next 10 minutes, there will be more than one SMS notification for charges for materials for these rims.
We've laid down the first layer of forged carbon, and now we need to build up the piece's thickness and reinforce it. First, we'll lay 240 gram carbon fiber, and on top, add the final 600 gram carbon layera strong, dense layer. We won't put the 600 gram layer on right away, because its weave is very coarse, and the vacuum will press it into the forged carbon, making the weave pattern visible on the surface. That's why we'll start with the finer weave first. You can also safely build up thickness and reinforce with white fiberglass cloth, right? Sometimes craftsmen jokingly call it white carbon fiber, but no, it's just fiberglass. That's it. But we're going to make a fully carbon fiber part, so we'll be working with carbon. Let's go ahead and start cutting the 240-gram carbon fiber.
I think it's already clear why custom carbon fiber parts cost as much as an airplane wing. At this point, we haven't even made it halfway through the technical process, and many people would probably have already given up and just painted the old chrome trim rings black. Just a little more patience and soon we'll be able to see for ourselves whether it's worth it.
We've laid down the 240, now we're moving on to the 600. As you've noticed, woven carbon fiber unravels very easily and gets frayed. To prevent it from fraying, and the coarser the weave, the more it falls apart. Because of the large pattern, I soaked it with glue from the inside. This way, it more or less holds its shape and won't fall apart as much. That's it. And we glue it on in the same way.
Yep, another layer of this far from cheap carbon fiber. As I was looking at this material, I sincerely hoped it would be the last layer, but my online banking notifications told me otherwise.
We've laid out our carbon fiber stack, and the next layer is the sacrificial fabric. This is fiberglass that's been impregnated with a release agent, so it won't stick to our part. It will separate our mesh for resin flow, and later we'll be able to peel it off.
Okay, the sacrificial layer turned out not to be too expensive, as it happens. I hope that's all.
We've laid down our sacrificial layer. It's also important that it completely covers our part with some overlap, so it's easy to grab and remove later. The next layer is the resin flow mesh. A mesh that allows the resin to spread evenly across our part, preventing any pockets where the resin might not reach. Unfortunately, it's hard to fix it in place with glue, so here we just have to improvise somehow. I haven't figured out the best way to secure it yet, or maybe he just copied it from someone else.
I'll just turn off SMS notifications from the bank.
Our system is almost ready. It's very important to glue everything in place, otherwise it will just be a pile of this salad chaotically shifting around, which won't allow us to properly perform a good vacuum infusion. Let's start laying out the tubes. We will need tubes, and they have to be rigid so that the vacuum doesn't collapse them. If we use soft tubes, the vacuum will crush them, and we might lose either the resin supply or the vacuum extraction. Also, a friend of mine suggested this life hack, gluing a resin flow mesh onto the tube, which helps distribute the resin more effectively. Special thanks for the life hacks. Now, we also make these kinds of tulips. They're huge, make them smaller.
Yeah, by the way, the sealing coat also cost money.
Now, it's really quite obvious why we carefully taped off the edges of the mold, especially in the areas where the sealing cord will eventually be attached. Those edges got all gunked up with glue and all sorts of fibers. Now, we very carefully and slowly peel off the masking tape, making sure not to disturb the surface underneath. This leaves us with a perfectly clean and clear spot, which is now ready for us to attach the sealing cord securely in place. We attach our tubes. We'll be pulling diagonally, just like that. We lay down the sealing cord. Like this. All right. Next, we'll need a film that will hold our whole sandwich under vacuum. You usually need twice as much film as the size of the part. We start securing the film from the edges.
Okay, you don't really need to count the film anymore, but all the other consumables needed to make a single rim cost $50 or 5,000 rubles. That's just the cost of materials, not including labor or the mold.
Our vacuum system is almost ready to start. As you may have noticed, I took twice as much cellophane as film. The film doesn't stretch, so I made these folds to provide the necessary volume for shrinkage, so the cellophane has somewhere to settle. Now we're rolling all these edges to prevent any leaks. So let's assemble everything and connect our setup to the vacuum. What does it consist of? A vacuum pump, a receiver, a resin trap which will add later on, a pressure gauge which will let us see whether our bag is holding pressure and if there are any issues. Next, we close off the inlet. We do this in such a way that the vacuum doesn't immediately pull at full strength. We pinch the tube a bit. Now we also shut off the vacuum inlet. This is to prevent losses throughout the whole system, since there might be some leaks somewhere. That's it. And we leave our system like this for a day. Well, depending on how much time we have. And now we need to check for leaks. That is, there might be a tiny hole somewhere that could let the vacuum escape, and then everything will be ruined. Otherwise, we'll have major problems later when we start pouring the resin. Let's start mixing the compound. We're going to carefully mix and dilute the epoxy resin. It's very important to get the proportions right properly. Next, we degauss the mixture.
So, to make one rim, it costs about $50 for materials. If you factor in Andrei's labor hours and the cost of making the mold, producing 2 custom rims would cost around $400 or 40,000 rubles. Of course, for us it will be a bit cheaper, since we're handling the entire process ourselves. But still, it won't be cheap. The operation was carried out successfully. We waited patiently until the resin finally reached the vacuum extraction tube, and we realized we had just barely enough resin right to the very last drop. I literally caught the exact moment when it was just about to run out. It was incredibly close. I mixed only 135 grams, and that was the perfect calculation. I don't know how I managed to guess so precisely. Luck seems to be on my side today. That's it, we're waiting for it to harden. Unboxing. A whole day has passed, our resin has polymerized, but before we bake everything under the infrared lamp, we need to very carefully take the parts out of the mold, making sure not to damage any details in the process. I got curious about how much carbon fiber parts for a Bugatti Chiron actually cost. I did a bit of googling and was blown away. A used carbon fiber insert for the rear bumper of a Chiron like this costs $90,000 or 9 million rubles. And that's not even the whole bumper, it's just a piece, and you'll need several more parts to complete the puzzle. And of course there's this little carbon fiber part for $50,000, which the spoiler lowers onto. It's not a mechanism, it's just a piece of carbon fiber. As for the cost of the mechanisms, we'll find out in the next episode. And now, at this particular stage, we are thoughtfully and carefully disassembling our sandwich in reverse, so to speak, step by step. But that's never easy. Now we're carefully feeling around for sacrificial fabric, which as you can see still hasn't stuck to the actual part, and we're gently and slowly peeling it off, along with a mesh that helps to evenly distribute the resin across the entire surface. Here you can clearly see how the sacrificial fabric works in practice. As the process completes, the sacrificial layer has peeled off cleanly from our part, demonstrating its effectiveness. Importantly, the part itself remained beautiful, smooth. Well, I actually broke a sweat, you can see it on me. Let's lift it. What a beauty! And that's without any varnish. Now we trim all these edges, we sand and varnish it. Now all that's left is to give it a good sanding and coat it with glossy varnish. At this point you probably have a question, why do we even need carbon fiber parts if they're so expensive and difficult to make? The thing is, there really aren't many alternatives. In my opinion, all the alternatives look cheap. I only see 2 options, real chrome or carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is straightforward, but when it comes to chrome there are some issues.
We definitely aren't considering options like decorative chrome plating or chemical metallization for a number of reasons. That's just not for us. We're only considering classic electroplated chrome. If anyone has the ability to chrome parts like this, please let us know. You can find our contact information in the video description. Yeah, I caught a bit of a cold by the end of this episode, so sorry about my voice. As a result, the real parts made from so-called forged carbon look like this. And now, your opinion is more important than ever. Be sure to share it in the comments. The final design of the car will depend on it. And if anyone has access to electroplated chrome, we would really appreciate any information or offers. Our contact details are in the video description. So we've sorted out the trim rings. Let's get back to the spoiler. We're starting to assemble our spoiler. Let me remind you that we've carefully glued and firmly pressed metal plates with threads into it, which will later be securely bolted to the brackets. Kolia welded and thoroughly polished the brackets, but this setup is just temporary for now. We'll perfect and further improve them later on, making sure everything is just right. This one goes right here, and this one goes over here, just like that, nice and easy. As a result, the spoiler is made of fiberglass mat with metal inserts. It's hollow inside, which means it's very light and strong. The next step is to prepare for installation. As you remember, our design uses 4 actuators. 2 of them at the far end are rigidly attached to the body, while the other pair is movable. They are connected to each other with a bar like this for added rigidity. We assemble our entire setup together. We've installed the linear actuators. Here everything is sealed with watertight glands. Here are the sliding trays that move back and forth, and here we have drains for any accumulated water. On top, our spoiler will be mounted using rod ends, a hinge connection, a spherical bearing. It fits in here like this, and everything is fastened with the bolts. While the guys are working on the final assembly, I'll share another piece of news. Many of you know that we are actively running and maintaining our Telegram channel. We are trying to monetize it, and this is vital for the workshop survival. There, we post content that didn't make it into the main video, show behind the scenes processes, and share a lot of other unique material. Recently, by the way, we put up a poll to decide which parts to make, chrome or carbon fiber. There's also a short post there about the cost of making this retractable spoiler. So our group has surpassed 40,000 subscribers, and we're getting ready to celebrate. When we reach 50,000 subscribers, we decided to hold a really big giveaway among all members of our Telegram channel, with some very cool, expensive prizes like this unique. Be sure to join us. The link is in the description. I fully understand that we have a huge audience watching us, and not everyone has experience working with fiberglass, linear actuators or rod ends. And of course, many people don't really understand how reliable and functional all of this is. So here we go. All for you. 3, 2, 1, let's go. I think the safety margin is beyond question. Thank you for watching. Good luck. May your X be sharp.